Loops are used when we want to repeatedly run a specific part of code over and over again. For example, if we want to print from 1 to 10 on the screen, the basic way of doing it is using 10 print commands. So we have to write print command 10 times to achieve this. But instead of doing this, we can simplify it by using loops. Basically, there are two types of loops, for loop and while loop. We will get into depth of these loops in our upcoming videos.
In this session, we will learn about for loop. For loops start with the keyword for, followed by variable. This can be named anything because this is a variable that will contain a single value for each iteration of for loop. Next we have range. The most easy way of telling for loop that how many times it should run is by using range function. We have already learned about range function in previous lessons. Range will return a list that will contain series of numbers, and for each number loop will execute its body. Range specifies that how many times loop should iterate through the body of for loop. The body of loop can be a single statement or it can be a bunch of statements. Let's look at an example. In this example, we want 5 numbers from 0 to 4 to be printed on the screen. So we specify a range of 5, which will give us a list of numbers from 0 to 4. And for every number in list, loop will execute its body. So what it will do here is first range function will generate a list of 5 elements from 0 to 4. For the first iteration of loop, first value of list, that is 0, will be inserted in variable value, and then it will be printed by print command in the body of loop. Then in the second iteration of loop, second value of list, that is 1, will be inserted in the variable value and it will be printed. Similarly, in the third iteration of loop, third value of list, that is 2, will be inserted in variable value and it will be printed on screen. This loop will continue for all the values of list. As we can see in the output, last value printed is 4, which is the last value of list we got from the range function. If you have figured out why 5 is not included in output, you are smart. Because we know that in range function upper limit is not included. In our case, it is 5, so it is not included and loop ends at value 4. So our print command executed 5 times for each value of list from 0 to 4. Let's look at another example. In this example, we have specified range from -2 to +3. And you can see in the output that loop executed 5 times for value from -2 to +2. We can also have custom lists instead of lists generated by range function. As you can see in this example, we have a list of fruits that contains 3 elements: apple, orange, and mango. And we have given this list to for loop to iterate through every element in fruits list. You can see in the output that for loop executed 3 times for every element of list and printed it. Now let's jump into code editor and write some code.
Okay, let's start with an example 1. In this example, I will make a list and then we will iterate through every element of that list using a for loop. So I will create a list. I will name it fruit. It will contain some elements like mango, apple, and orange. So let's make a for loop. For value in our list of fruits Let's make it as okay. We will print every value. Print value. Let's run it quickly and see the output. As you can see in the output, it printed all of the elements of the list fruit, that is mango, apple and orange. So what for loop did? It iterated through every element of this fruits list. First it took mango as a value, then printed the value. Then it took apple as a value and printed that value. And then finally it took orange as value and printed that value. So it's simple and easy. It just iterated through every value of that list. Let's move to another example. In this example I will so for value in range, let's say starting from 1 ending at 5, it will iterate through 1, 2, 3 and 4, not including 5, because as we know in range function upper limit is never included but the lower limit is included. So I will just firstly print all the values and we will see the output. As you can see in the output, it printed from 1 to 4. So range gave us a sequence between 1 and 4. Now I can quickly change the range. I will just make the lower limit to -2 and keep the upper limit to 3. So it will print from -2 to +2. Let's see the output. It printed -2, -1, 0, 1 and 2 here you can see in the output. We can also give increment in range function as you remember from our previous lecture. So I will just add an increment here of 2. So it will now just, instead of increment of 1, it will give an increment of 2. Let's see the output. As you can see, first value is -2, second with the increment of 2, it is 0, and third with the increment of 2, it printed 2. So you can play around with this for loop by changing the values, and the range function simply gives us a sequence between what parameters we give to this function. Let's move to another example. In this example, I will make a string and then iterate through every character of that string using a for loop. Let's see how it's done. I have a string name and I can give a value, for example, John. As you remember from our previous lecture, that string is a sequence, that every character is on some particular index. For example, J here in John is on 0 index, H is on 1. I will just print all the values for value in name print value. So let's see the output. As you can see in the output window, it printed J, H, O and N. It took this name string as a sequence because we know this is the characteristics of a string, that every character in a string is on a particular index.
Your task for the practice of for loop is this. Write a program that will ask a user to enter a number, then you will print the table of that number. Use for loop. The flow of your program will go like this. You will ask the user to enter a number. Suppose he enters 2. So you will print the table of 2. Give it a try. Solution is provided in the next video. In this session, we will learn about while loop. While loop is another form of loop. While loop starts with the keyword while followed by condition that needs to be true for while loop to execute the body of loop. So as long as condition is true, loop will continue, and as soon as condition becomes false, while loop will stop. For every iteration, while loop will check the condition, and when it becomes false, it will stop. Condition here can be anything. Here we have some examples to understand the nature of condition. For example, we can have a condition that variable value less than 10. It means that execute while loop until value of variable is less than 10. And as soon as value of variables becomes 10 or greater than 10, stop executing loop. In second example, we say that execute while loop as long as value of variable is not equal to 209. So if value of variable will become 209, while loop will stop its execution. And if it is any other value except 209, loop will continue. We can also use multiple conditions by using and or operators, similarly as we did in if and else. If we use AND operator, then both the conditions need to be satisfied for while loop to continue execution. If any single or both conditions are failed, then while loop will stop. And in case of OR operator, if only one condition is true or both conditions are true, loop will continue execution. And execution of loop will only stop if both conditions are false. Now let's write some coding examples. Let's write our first coding example of while loop. I will create a variable I and I will assign a value 0 to it. You can name this variable anything. I is the most commonly used variable in loops. So I'm using I, but you can name it of your own choice. So I will create a while loop by keyword while. As you can see, IntelliSense is telling us about while. So then two round brackets. Inside of these two round brackets, I have to provide a condition. So here we can provide any conditions. I will give a condition that I is less than 5 and a colon sign. In the body of while loop, I will print I. And what I will do more here is I will increase the value of I every time. So I will say I is equals to I plus 1. So now every time the loop body will execute, I will be increased one time. So the value of I will have an increment of 1. So let's see the output. As you can see in the output, it printed from 0 to 4. So what it did here, initially the value of I was 0. For the first iteration of while loop, it checked the condition that whether I is less than 5. The condition was true. So it entered into the body of while loop. It printed the I, which was 0 initially. Then in the next line, it incremented I with 1. So now I contains value 1. Now next time, when the while loop executed, it checked for the condition. Now current value of I is 1 and it is less than 5. So the condition was again true, so it printed I and incremented I by 1. Similarly, for the third time, it again checked the condition. Now I was 2 and its condition was still true, so it printed I and incremented it by 1. So for the fourth value, it was same, and when I became 5, the condition became false here. I was equal to 5, so while didn't execute it and it stopped on 4. If I change the condition here that I is less than 10, so let's see the output. As you can see in the output, it printed from 0 to 9. So this is the benefit of while loop, that we can do more things in less lines of code. If I change the value of variable from 0 to 10, now the while loop will not execute even for a single time. So let's see the output. As you can see, there is nothing in the output because the condition failed for the first time. I was 10 and it was not less than 10. So the condition failed and it didn't execute the body of the while loop. So we can give any of the conditions of our choice in while loop. We can also give multiple condition here. So I will just make another variable. I will call it name and add a string. Let's say Smith. So I will just add an AND operator and check the condition for name as well. Name double equals to, I say if it is Smith, then you have to execute the body. So now we have used the AND operator. So both of the conditions on the left and the right side of the AND operator needs to be true for the execution of while loop. If any one condition fails, while will not execute its body. So I will change I to 1 and name is Smith. So I will just execute the code here. And as you can see in the output window, it executed from 1 to 9. Now if I change the name, if I change or I misspell it, I will add another h at the end here. So the second condition become wrong. It become false. So the loop will not execute. Let's see. As you can see in the output, it didn't printed anything because the second condition failed. But if I change this AND operator to OR operator, now what OR operator means is if any of the condition is true, you have to execute the body. Now we have I is less than 10, that is true, but name is equals to Smith, that is not true. But the loop will execute because of OR operator. So we will just quickly run it. As you can see, loop executed for all the values. You can try changing these conditions and play around with while loop so you will learn it better. Now for the sake of fun, I will just tell you one thing that we can also go into an infinity loop. If we write while 1, so while 1 means go into an infinity loop. This loop will never stop. So I will just print something here and I will write fun. So let's run this. As you can see, it keeps on printing string fun. So that's all for this session. Let's move to our next session.